I've always believed that if you're going to build the future, you can't tiptoe your way into it. You have to blast forward with engines firing at full throttle. And that's basically how I've approached everything from rockets to electric cars to brain-machine interfaces to tunnels. Because in my mind, the default outcome for any ambitious idea is failure unless you fight like hell to change that trajectory. And while most people see the headlines or the stock price or the flamethrowers or whatever random thing is trending on social media, what they don't see is the constant balancing act between pushing humanity forward and convincing the world that these insane goals are not only achievable but necessary. And that brings me to this whole situation with the major shareholder opposition, including big players like NBIM, Norway's wealth fund, who came out against my compensation package, which, honestly, I never viewed as a traditional pay package at all. More like a ridiculously high-risk bet that would only pay off if Tesla reached milestones that most analysts thought were basically impossible at the time. Because back then, Tesla was valued at a tiny fraction of what it eventually became, and we were fighting off bankruptcy more than once. And I was signing personal loans, selling assets, throwing everything in just to keep the company alive. And when the board put forward this performance-based plan, the idea was simple. If Tesla succeeds beyond anyone's wildest expectations, then yeah, I get compensated, but if it doesn't, I get nothing. Which is exactly what happened the last time we structured something like this, and yet now, years later, after Tesla hit almost every milestone faster than anyone projected, some of the same groups who said we'd never reach those numbers turned around and said the package was too big, too risky, too dilutive, too whatever. And I get it, I really do. Institutional investors have responsibilities. They're managing trillions of dollars. They're supposed to worry about dilution and fairness and governance and all the usual corporate stuff. But it's a little ironic because the entire point of the plan was to align incentives with extreme success, not comfort, not safety, not average results, but world-changing progress. And what frustrates me isn't that they have concerns. Concerns are fine, concerns are normal. It's that sometimes people forget the scale of what we're trying to do at Tesla. Transition the entire planet to sustainable energy as fast as possible. Build factories at near impossible speeds, ramp production from thousands to millions of vehicles, create an energy ecosystem that rewrites how electricity is stored and used. Push autonomy to the point where cars become safer than human drivers, and do all of this while competing in one of the most brutal industries on earth. And when you're operating at that level, incentives matter, alignment matters, execution matters, and a plan that looks enormous on paper only looks enormous because the mission itself is enormous. And so, when large investors like NBIM came out and said they opposed the package because of the scale and the dilution and the risk, I felt like we were having two separate conversations. One about the ordinary mechanics of corporate compensation systems, and one about the extraordinary reality of building something that shouldn't even exist in the first place. Because Tesla was never supposed to win, and yet here we are, building the future piece by piece, gigafactory by gigafactory, innovation by innovation, and whether people approve or not, whether votes swing in one direction or another, I will keep doing what I've done from the beginning, which is to push harder, move faster, and refuse to slow down simply because the road ahead looks steep. And if people want to challenge my compensation, challenge my decisions, challenge the vision. That's fine. That's part of the process. But I'm not here for comfort. I'm here to make the future happen. And the future does not get built by playing it safe. And look, the thing people sometimes misunderstand is that none of this has ever been about personal enrichment for me. Because if I wanted to take the easy route, I could have cashed out ages ago, walked away with billions, lived on some private island with robot butlers, powered by solar panels or whatever. But that's not who I am and never has been. And honestly, the whole conversation around compensation always feels like people are looking at the wrong variable, because they're treating Tesla like a normal company led by someone chasing a paycheck, when in reality the company functions more like a massive, ongoing physics experiment, fused with a mission to shift the entire energy infrastructure of the planet. And there's no version of that where you do the job halfway. So, yeah, of course people like NBIM and other large shareholders raised concerns about risk and dilution, because from their perspective they're seeing huge numbers and thinking in terms of portfolio exposure and governance frameworks. But from my perspective, those numbers represent the extraordinary difficulty of the mission and the extraordinary results required to justify success, results that seemed nearly impossible when the plan was created. And the irony is that the same investors who criticized the scale of the award now benefited massively from the exact milestones they once thought were unachievable. And I can't help but wonder sometimes if the world has become so allergic to ambition that people forget how these breakthroughs happen in the first place. Because it's not committees and governance reports that build rockets or scale energy storage or push autonomous driving to the edge of science fiction. It's teams who work absurd hours with fire in their eyes because they believe in something that doesn't exist yet. And I've always tried to put performance at the center of everything. Not comfort, not tradition, not the illusion of safety. And when I see headlines saying the plan is too outsized or too risky or too generous, I want to say, well, yes, it is outsized, because the mission is outsized, and it is risky because the future is risky, and it is generous only if we shatter the expectations of nearly every expert in the field, which we basically did, and still people act shocked. Like, success wasn't the whole point from the start, and maybe part of this is that when Tesla actually delivered on the impossible, the scale of what that meant hit people harder than they ever anticipated, including some of the biggest investors on the planet. And suddenly they're looking at the results and saying, wait a second, this is too much. Maybe we didn't think he would actually reach these targets. Maybe we didn't think the company would multiply in valuation by more than anyone predicted. And it's almost funny in a way, because if the company had failed, nobody would be arguing about the fairness of the plan. They'd be saying, wow, that was a bold plan that didn't work out. But since it did work out, now there's discomfort. And honestly, I'm not here to make anyone comfortable, never have been, because comfort is the enemy of progress. And if investors want Tesla to move slower or think smaller or be less audacious, then they're looking at the wrong company and the wrong CEO. And when the votes come in and the debates intensify and the governance people write their memos, what I'm focused on isn't the noise, it's the mission. Because at the end of the day, the planet is still heating up, millions of cars still burn fossil fuels, the world still needs energy storage at an unprecedented scale, and humanity still needs to accelerate innovation instead of complaining about the mechanics of rewarding it. So, if people want to oppose, they can oppose. If they want to critique, they can critique. But nothing, absolutely nothing, will slow me down from making the future happen. And the more I think about all of this, the more it becomes obvious that the conflict isn't really about the pay package itself. It's about a fundamental
difference in philosophy. A difference between people who believe the future should be optimized and people who believe the future should be protected. And I've just never been a protector of the status quo. I've always been
the guy who kicks down the door labeled impossible just to see what's on the other side. And that kind of mindset tends to terrify large institutional investors because they're designed to avoid volatility, minimize risk, diversify exposure, all the things that make perfect sense when you're managing trillions of dollars, but make zero sense when you're trying to build a multiplanetary civilization or electrify the entire global transportation system. And I've said it 100 times, Tesla could have easily died maybe 10 different times. And during each of those moments, nobody was stepping forward with grand speeches about fairness or dilution. Instead, they were quietly preparing the eulogy as if it were a foregone conclusion. And now when the company has climbed out of that gravity well and hit milestones that looked absurd on paper, suddenly everyone wants to audit every bolt and every atom of the plan that helped motivate those outcomes. And it's kind of amusing because the idea that I somehow engineered this for personal gain ignores the blatantly obvious fact that I'm already working on 10 other things that have zero to do with compensation, things that are way harder, way riskier, and way more important to the species than anything involving a spreadsheet. And yet the narrative becomes too much, too excessive, too large, which to me signals that some people still haven't grasped the sheer scale of the mission. Because when you're trying to bend the arc of human progress, you're not competing for minor victories. You're going up against the inertia of an entire